I know that there's a lot of new exoplanets being discovered, but I don't know. Some of them I read about are quite interesting. But is there something that comes to mind for you of like some of this exoplanet work is really showing some wild stuff out there?
Yeah, I mean, this kind of new field of exoplanetary science has tons of wild and interesting stuff. And I think over the last several years, there've been a number of discoveries or realizations that I've found particularly interesting and sort of profound, really. Some of those are to do with individual planetary systems. So, for example, we see quite a few planetary systems out there that their parent star is much smaller than our sun. So stars come in different sizes, right? And it's, different masses, and smaller stars, lower mass stars, are less luminous. And so they're less luminous, and because they're lower in mass, the nature of the planetary systems that form around them tend to be more compact. So we see planetary systems out there that these are these extraordinary, almost, you know, science fiction like alternatives. So there are planetary systems where we know of 7 or 8 planets that we have detected the presence of around a single small star. And all of those planets are similar in size to the Earth. Some are maybe a little bit bigger, some perhaps a little bit smaller. And all of their orbits would fit within the orbit of Mercury in our own solar system. So they're kind of these crazy, shrunken, compact planetary systems where, the length of each year is measured in a few Earth days. So you kind of wonder, and we think that it's possible that some of those worlds are habitable and land in the right place where their surface conditions could be not dissimilar to those of the Earth, and therefore conceivably life could exist there. But what a strange place for life to happen. And if that life becomes capable of realizing where it is and building the technology to do that, you kind of think that's such an alternate reality. They live in this universe where maybe they didn't need Galileo or Copernicus because it was obvious what sort of place they lived in from the get-go. And then you wonder what would have happened. And then, yeah, we keep finding planets that push the boundaries of what we understand planets to be, and planets that are very dissimilar to anything in our own solar system. So some planets out there orbit very closely to their parent stars and are extraordinarily hot as a result, and actually have, rain in the planetary atmosphere that's composed of metals. Molten droplets of metals, metal vapor condenses in the way that water condenses in our own atmosphere and rains out in the planet. There are worlds that are on very extremely elliptical orbits where their seasons are just insane compared to the seasons that we experience on the Earth, going from very, very hot to very, very cold. And then, in the bigger picture, what I think is so fascinating, and it's still an ongoing story, we don't know the end point to this, is that the architecture of planetary systems is so varied. The solar system is actually a somewhat unusual architecture in terms of the mix of planets that we have and the spread of those planets. But to some extent, that's also because we are still not competent enough or good enough with our instruments to actually fully detect and characterize planetary systems that might actually be much more like our solar system. So all of this is projection. In science, you extrapolate from what you know. But it is true that diversity of planetary systems is truly extraordinary out there. These compact systems, systems with these elliptical orbits, systems with very different mixtures of planets. The most common types of planets that we see out there are actually things that are somewhere between, a planet like Earth and a planet like Neptune or Jupiter. These things in between that we don't have in our solar system. We do not have an example of what might be the most common type of planet in the galaxy in our own solar system. So yeah, so exoplanetary science, lots of things happening. We now have instruments like the James Webb Space Telescope that is getting data on the atmospheric composition of some of these planets, and there are plans afoot at the moment. NASA is planning already for a future space telescope called the Habitable Worlds Observatory that's designed to specifically look for Earth similar planets around nearby stars and to actually get the light that's reflected from those planets. And from that reflected light, deduce things about, are there clouds? Is there water? Is there possibly oxygen? Is there pigmentation on the planet that could be because of life? Earth is a heavily pigmented planet because of life, plants and other stuff. So yeah, it's a fascinating area.